once again. The three of you have such intriguing backgrounds, and I have something in common with all of you. I'll just put that out there. I'm going to start with my fellow Baysider, Paul Bader, and you're actually the only person nominated who's actually driven a taxi. When you were a driver in the 70s, you didn't own your medallion, correct?
That's correct. I drove for a fleet, Crescent and 41st Avenue, main operating. I still remember the name. For those of you who don't remember, basically there were two kinds of medallions at that time, and they had different price structure. One was a fleet medallion that was owned by a fleet, and then there were individual medallions that were owned by individual people. The Those of us who drove for fleets also were members of a union at that time, taxi drivers union. And there was a schedule, a rate schedule that you started at and you went to, and it was based on a percentage of the meter that you got. You started, if I remember correctly, was a couple of years ago. I think we started at about 45%, and we went up to 50%. And it was based on a variety of parameters that made you go up. But for most people, they went up pretty quickly to the 50%.
Yeah, yeah. So some of us do remember those days. If you had your druthers these days, would you choose to stay in fleet driving, or would you drive for Uber or Lyft or one of those guys?
Um,
It's a tough question.
no, it's not. Um, because the individual driver in those days was had more recognition and respect than I think that many of them have today. It was a profession that both fleet drivers as well as individual owners did, and it was a middle class job,
That's right.
it enabled you to have a middle class income.
Hmm.
We have certainly seen over the more recent years, um, I mean, the incredible economic hardship that drivers at different levels have gone to, particularly, and some of them has even resulted, unfortunately, in suicides, as we know. Um, and so I would certainly, if fleets even existed in the same way and the structure was the same, it would not be would not be a difficult situation. I'd want to
No
once again
question.
drive for a fleet.
No question. Yeah, and I'm particularly sensitive around medallion drivers, taxi drivers. In my area in Southeast Queens, we have a tremendous number of drivers, particularly in Richmond Hill and other areas in Queens. So,
So I will also augment my answer by saying this. Also, at that time, there were what we used to call black cars.
yes.
And they were the largest one was a company out of Brooklyn called Black Pearl,
Hmm.
that also went into Queens at the time. And I knew why they existed because I was a fleet driver who drove in all five boroughs. I was unique in that. There were not that many drivers who would drive all throughout the different boroughs, particularly in certain neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Queens. Um, I learned, and I knew these neighborhoods. I learned, however, that like anything else, if you're willing to drive and you understand it, there's a lot of money to be made. And there was no place that I turned over fast, as we used to turn them over, as certain neighborhoods of, in Brooklyn and Queens. I knew the neighborhoods. I was comfortable driving there, and especially and I drove nights, so most of the time, and I served. It was underserved community by the medallion owners in that time.
Yeah, yeah. In thinking about your questions in your questionnaire, we asked you the questions about your views about TLC policies and the for hire vehicle industry when we sent out our pre-hearing questions. But most of your replies consisted of needing more information. Do you come into this role having any views about what the policies of the TLC should be with respect to street hails and pricing, even in terms of normative values?
Yes, um, I tend to want to do as much research and get as much background information I can before making definitive conclusions.
Hmm.
But clearly, there should be a direct correlation between the increase in the fare an app is charging a consumer and that percentage of that increase which is going to go to the driver. What that is I don't have an, I hopefully we get to that point and we'll be able to have more definitive. But yes, clearly it should be in a situation whereby if the app is charging more, the driver should get his share, fair share of whatever that increase is going to be. It doesn't make sense sometimes to have a dynamic where the price is going up and the driver doesn't benefit from the price going up. I don't, it doesn't, I don't want to see that happen. So I want to see whatever we can do to make that equitable, to do that. I also understand that it is that, it is, you have, one of the good things about the old fleet system was there was a shared benefit. The, the fleet wanted you to do better. The more money that you booked, the more money they made and the more money the driver made. The driving apps now, that no longer exists because they don't really care on each individual car, since they're not having any investment in each individual car, how much they get for that individual car. They just care about how much they're going to get overall. So which is totally the opposite view of an individual driver who wants to optimize and maximize the return he's going to get and the income he's going to get from the amount of time that he sits behind the wheel. It is, for those of you who haven't done it, it is not an easy thing to sit behind the wheel of any kind of vehicle for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time. Okay. And I've done it, as you can see, in a variety of times. I know what it's like, especially when you have to sit in traffic, and the drivers must get their fair share of whatever the fare is that's being charged.
I don't disagree with that at all. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to move on to Mrs. Sorrentino. Speaking along the lines of equitability and equity, what's your view of surge pricing?
It's, some of it is ironic, some of it makes sense, and some of it is ironic. What's ironic is that they have surge pricing that's going to go in at later at certain times of the day. Well, the irony is that if you pick up a fare at 12 at midnight, it's going to take you less time to get to where you have to go than if you have that same fare at 6 o'clock. So the idea that one has to pay a lot more for a ride which is shorter doesn't really kind of make sense to me, but they can get away with it. And what happens therefore also is that the disproportionate amount of that is going to the app as opposed to going to the driver, because if there is any additional aggravation that's going to be caused, it's going to be the driver working at night, not the app, because the app is electronic and they don't know the difference between the sun coming up and the sun going down. But for the driver driving, he's the one that has to understand what if there's any difference, what that's going to be.
Thank you very much.